Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim and you're watching Turkiye's Diplomacy. On today's episode, I'll be joined by Daily Sabah's editorial coordinator, Dr. Mehmet Çelik, and political analyst John Kavalic. We'll be discussing President Donald Trump's first 100 days in office, his priorities, his failures, and the approach towards countries like Turkey, Russia, Israel, and China. But before we begin our discussions, let's take a look at this news report.
...18 aydır Gazze, son 100 yılın en acımasız katliamlarının yanı sıra tüm insanlığın yüz akı olacak destansı bir direnişe de sahne olmaktadır.
Turkey's presidential cabinet convened under the chairmanship of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan in the capital of Ankara on Monday.
Tıpkı Doğu Kudüs ve Batı Şeria gibi Gazze'de Filistin halkınındır. Gazze'li kardeşlerimiz doğdukları topraklarda ilelebet yaşamaya inşallah devam edecektir.
The president emphasized the unwavering spirit of Palestinians in the face of brutality, noting that they have repeatedly demonstrated their determination not to surrender and abandon their homeland.
Filistin halkı teslim olmayacağını, vatanlarını terk etmeyeceğini, zalime hiçbir şekilde boyun eğmeyeceğini, tüm imkansızlıklara, tüm barbarlıklara rağmen defalarca göstermiştir.
Erdoğan reiterated Turkey's strong and consistent support for Pakistan, stressing that Ankara continues to advocate for peace and justice at every opportunity.
Kardeş Pakistan halkına olan güçlü desteğimizi tekrar teyit ettik. Türkiye olarak bölgemizde ve ötesinde yeni çatışmalar istemediğimizi her fırsatta vurguluyoruz.
The Turkish leader expressed concern over rising tensions between Pakistan and India, calling for the immediate de-escalation of the situation.
Pakistan'la Hindistan arasında tırmanan gerilimin daha vahim boyutlara evrilmeden bir an önce düşürülmesini arzu ediyoruz. Dışişleri Bakanlığımız ve diğer birimlerimiz de süreci yakından izliyoruz.
Welcome back to the program. A very warm welcome to my guests today, John Kavalic, who is a senior research editor at Issue Insight in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Mehmet Çelik, who is the editorial coordinator at Daily Sabah. Mehmet, today we are going to be discussing President Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. And I would like to start with you, Mehmet. Tell me about the new era that Turkey is seeing under President Donald Trump's presidency. The two leaders haven't met yet, but Hakan Fidan and Marco Rubio's American counterpart have met multiple times. There have been discussions about the F-35 jets, about the F-16 jets. There's Syria, there's Iran. There's so many different things that are impacting the relation right now. How would you evaluate the first 100 days of President Donald Trump's presidency in terms of the United States' ties with Turkey?
Now, Turkey and the U.S. relations in the previous terms during Biden administration, we can say that it saw a period of stagnation. Unfortunately, even before Biden was elected, he had a very distant relationship, or he put a distance between himself and President Erdoğan. Before he was elected, he had said that, he had basically, in a media setting, he was saying that we should get rid of this administration in Ankara. I'm just, translating basically what he said. Now, during the term, we saw this small steps towards one another from Biden administration towards Ankara, but unfortunately, it never materialized to overcome that stagnation in ties. Prior to that, we had Trump administration as well, and during the first Trump administration, of course, Turkey and the U.S. relationship was fluctuating at times, but overall, there was a leader-to-leader diplomacy and a very transactional setting when it comes to the ties between Ankara and Washington over many different differences or the things that they had agreed on. Now, in the first term, we can see that, we need to acknowledge, first of all, that in international relations, it's very hard to find two countries that look at everything from an eye-to-eye level. So this is the same with the Turkey and U.S. relationship. There's many differences, there's many disagreements. However, Mr. Erdoğan and Mr. Trump, they acknowledge these differences and they still try to work together. So, I think this is a good news to begin with, because there's no stagnation, there's no lack of communication. Mr. Erdoğan, when Trump was first elected for his second term, he was one of the first leaders to congratulate him, and since then they have been talking to one another. Even though it's been a short period of time, there has been that diplomatic channel open. But there is many differences that they can work on, and there's this chaos, economic and foreign policy chaos that Mr. Trump has brought to international arena. Is in a way can bring both challenges and opportunities for Turkey. For tariffs, for example, when many are complaining about these tariffs, Turkey sees that actually as an opportunity in the U.S. market against other actors, for example. That 10% tariff is not something that would match, let's say, the tariffs imposed on China or other trade partners for the United States. When it comes to other bilateral specific issues like the F-16s or F-35s, when it comes to Syria, I think these are some of the issues that can be maneuvered or can be negotiated or can, in time, I think, protecting both interests of both sides, because both Mr. Erdoğan and Mr. Trump, they're very transactional, very pragmatic, and they're both try to maximize the interests of their own countries, at least from a point of view where we see from Turkey, we see that Mr. Erdoğan is trying to maximize Turkey's interest in every relationship that he engages with the world leaders. Mr. Trump, the European leaders, China, Russia. I mean, Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdoğan, they don't see everything from an eye-to-eye level. They have many disagreements, and Syria was a big disagreement, but they overcome that. I think with Syria issue, for example, between Turkey and the United States, if there must be a stable Syria, a peaceful Syria, a Syria that is supported by the international community, non-state actors must be eliminated. And on the top of the list comes, I think, the YPG terrorist group, which the United States has been backing. If that is eliminated, and Turkey, as it has been saying, I mean, the United States says they're supporting the YPG to eliminate Daesh threat, but Turkey is already forming another coalition with the regional actors and has been very willing when it comes to this fight against Daesh or against terrorism. So if Turkey is establishing that coalition and put, an effective fight against Daesh is carried out by a legitimate army, then the United States will not need the YPG anymore. But of course, we know that that fight against Daesh is not the only reason why the United States backed YPG. The Russian presence there, Iranian presence there, the oil reserves. So there's a lot to actually discuss when it comes to how the United States will withdraw and what will Turkey do to eliminate that Daesh threat. Many of Trump's actions in the first 100 days, they have been to appeal the base at home rather than satisfying the international community to protect, for example, the tariffs, even when it comes to Ukraine, Russia. I think this is one of his most challenging moments because he promised to end the war right away, but the war still continues. And I think many sees that as a big compromise from the Ukrainian side and in the bigger picture from the U.S. side, the U.S. and the Western side as a compromise against Russia. But all in all, I think Trump's relationship with Ankara, I mean, in every speech that Turkey is mentioned or every press conference, even during his press conference with Netanyahu, Mr. Trump's words about Mr. Erdoğan was very positive. And I think that sets a very good tone in that relationship. But nevertheless, I think that unpredictability about Mr. Trump's actions and that prompt responses that we can never guess how they will turn out. I think it still leaves that room for unpredictability. But I think from Ankara, that approach is received very positively. During the press conference with Netanyahu and how he mentioned Turkey and Turkey's success in Syria, etc., I think that and that combined with diplomatic channels being open, Mr. Fidan's frequent visit and Mr. Erdogan's frequent talks with Mr. Trump, these are some of the issues that are received positively. But Turkey and U.S. relationship is no longer a bilateral issue or bilateral channel that can be worked on without without counting for other actors. Europe, for example, Russia, on the other hand, Israel's effect on this relationship. Now we see India, Pakistan. How these will all play out in the international arena will also have an impact for sure on Turkey and the U.S. relationship.
John, I want your analysis on Syria. Now, 14 years have passed. There was a civil war. There's the Assad government is no longer there. He has been ousted. There's a new leadership. What role is the United States trying to play here or could play in Syria, considering the fact that President Erdogan has warned the United States on multiple occasions that you cannot fight one terror group with another by supporting another. So what's your analysis about this? How is the United States going to play a new role, or if any, in Syria?
I was in Syria the day that boy died in Daraa when the civil war began, and traveled back and forth since. For President Trump, he looks at Syria as a problem, but it's not an important problem. It's not a big problem. It's a problem, and it's a big problem for others, but not necessarily for the United States. He's primarily looking, as the doctor talked about, it's transactional. But for Turkey, the challenge will be convincing President Trump that whatever President Trump decides to do with respect to Syria is not going to sit unwell in Israel. And that's a big part of the decision-making process for whatever President Trump and the Trump-Vance administration does. The issues that Turkey has with YPG, and the U.S. has with the remnants of ISIS, the camps that are still there that house all of those women and children that are basically descendants of the terrorists that countries don't want to take. Those are all, in some respects, more important to President Trump than is the holistic approach to fixing Syria, to re-engaging Syria, because he really isn't interested. And so I think you'll see him open to transactional deals, but in the end, most of those dealings that he's going to want to have with respect to Syria, or President Erdogan's going to want to have with respect to Syria, President Trump's going to view them from a perspective of the state of Israel. And one example, we go back to the first Trump administration, where from the administration's perspective, then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said we're recognizing realities on the ground, and so the Golan Heights, we recognize Israel's in control of it, so basically Israel's going to annex it, they're going to keep it. That's going to be a big problem with respect to how Gaza is solved, how Russia-Ukraine is solved. You look then to the Pacific, how China-Taiwan is resolved. And you have, where President Erdogan has some red lines, President Trump's lines are more pinkish. They're more flexible. And so when talking about, the Biden-Harris administration being one of stagnation with respect to the relationship with Turkey, the Trump-Vance administration is uncertainty. And so I don't think you're going to see a list-like movement. These are all just going to be inflection points. They're going to be moments in a series of moments. But I don't think you're going to have a resolution to many of them. I think you're going to have sort of a lot of temporary solutions to move to the next temporary solution.
John, tell me about the new deal that was signed just recently with the Syrian government and the PYD-YPG affiliated SDF. How is that deal going to pan out? Because the United States has obviously said that it's fighting terrorism in Syria. Now, since that deal has been signed with the government, how do you look at the future steps that are going to be there?
You know, whenever you're evaluating how the Trump administration is going to be looking at something, but it's more important how President Trump is going to look at something. It's first through the optics, how it looks, as opposed to what it actually will do, and the duration of whatever it's purported to do. He looks at the moment. It's like a commercial. You know, it's not necessarily a photograph, but it's more like a commercial, a video, a movie, but it's short form. So where he is advised and where he is briefed on what the new Syrian government is doing, it all sounds fine, and the agreements are important, particularly in terms of trying to lessen the distance between how the government of Turkey looks at groups that are fighting within Syria and how the U.S. looks at those same groups and how the EU is looking at those same groups. But without wanting to sound like a broken record, I come back to the agreements that the new government of Syria is signing that look to lessen the obstacles to move the U.S. and Turkey closer in terms of how they perceive different groups that are fighting in Turkey on their behalf or against them, is going to shift back when it comes to a final decision to the State of Israel and the relationship between the U.S. and the Netanyahu government for however long it's in place.
Mehmet, let's talk about the war in Ukraine. During his presidential campaign, Trump said that he could end the war in 24 hours. Now we're 100 days into his presidency. Nothing has happened. Some deals have been discussed, but there's no concrete decision that has been made. How are you evaluating Trump's approach on the war in Ukraine? Because do you think that he truly has leverage over Kyiv or Moscow?
You see, as a United States president, Donald Trump has a lot of power. And given his personal style, I think that hold to power and that powerful feeling that comes with Trump's style becomes a weakness for him because he overestimates his power in the international arena when we're in a setting where there's a transformation now in the international order, where there's other players that are nearly as powerful as the United States. And I think that overestimation and becoming a weakness is played out really well in this Ukraine and Russia conflict, because Trump said he will end the war in 24 hours when he comes to the office, let's say 24 days. But I think it's going to take much longer than that to actually convince Putin to settle the war down. And this is not just saying that the Ukrainian side will do some compromises and give away some land and the war will end, because I don't think the war in Ukraine, to put it in a more simplistic word, the war in Ukraine wasn't about Russia and Ukraine, in my perspective. There is a bigger war that is played out through Ukraine between the Western world, NATO or United States and some European powers, and Russia on the other side. It's a game of bigger powers rather than just Ukraine trying to get rather than Russia getting some Ukrainian land. So I think that leverage is very limited when it comes to Putin. When it comes to Ukraine, of course, there's much more leverage there. But again, there is the European side that is disagreeing with Trump on how he is approaching this conflict itself. So there's some, I think, limits to that leverage due to the differences between the European Union, European powers, like the UK, for example, and the United States. So that leverage that he felt he would have over this conflict is not there. But if I may ask a question, and just to make the conversation a little bit more lively, I mean, I have two questions. First of all, do you think there is a connection or a lineage between Trump and the U.S. foreign policy? And second is, Trump said, you mentioned about Israel. Trump told Netanyahu to be reasonable. What was that all about?
Well, I'll go with the second one first. It's defining reasonableness. And President Trump is very flexible in terms of the moment. And so what he said with Prime Minister Netanyahu was, one of his first statements was, you need to stop this because it doesn't look good on television. And that's it, and it's similar to what you were talking about with Ukraine, where one of President Trump's first statements about Ukraine was, I want to stop the young, handsome men from dying. And it's very Trumpian. Young, handsome men, the optics, how it looks. So
celebrity lifestyle, right? I mean, this is what Trump is basically.
It is very much, he is, we are all living in the production room of a television show. And we're watching in real time what we haven't seen before, which is the director and the producers and the script people all projecting this. And there's Donald Trump. And so we're sort of inside his head, listening as he develops these thoughts. The lineage, I think you were mentioning, again, he doesn't look too far in the past. He doesn't look too far into the future. He's very much focused on that moment. And with Israel, when he says to Prime Minister Netanyahu, be reasonable, wrap it up in that. But has he said, those 2.3 million people that now have not had food and water and that for
and genocide taking place,
and which we're watching on television, and the real estate that is Gaza continues to shrink. What is President Trump doing? And he's not. He's basically letting the Netanyahu government play this out. But every once in a while, he'll interject when it's the optics, when he sees the various news channels, when he sees the mainstream media or the fake news. But when there's too much coverage that it's looking bad and that he's responsible for it, then he'll weigh in. But it's still about how it looks as opposed to how it impacts people's lives.
So then he's basically playing out what the U.S. foreign policy is planning as an establishment, the state itself, rather than the president.
Well, that's where, in his first term.
Sorry, Omar, I'm taking over.
No, it's perfectly fine. Please go on.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
In his first term, what we saw was he separated himself from his government. And so it would be the Trump-Pence administration. But he would say, I'm friends with Xi, I'm friends with Putin, I'm friends with Erdogan, I'm friends with everybody. And then the government would sanction the Russian Federation. And during Trump's term, more sanctions on the Russian Federation than any other administration combined. But Putin and I are really good friends. And that's Pompeo doing that stuff. That's not me. And this time around, we're beginning to see that same theme play out, where initially it's Trump-Vance. The vice president has been much more active, but he will still sort of separate. Marco's doing a good job with this, or Hegseth's doing this, but they're doing that, but I'm still having, and his theatrics, I think, it becomes a problem in the Xi conversations that he's recently alluded to. He's gone to torturous lengths to not admit that he has not spoken to President Xi within the last weeks. But it's all the presentation, the optics, and it ends up, potentially causing more of a problem. So I think we're going to continue to see him separating himself from his own administration, but also with respect to with Syria, with Israel, that it's very much going to be how it all looks and what he can do for the moment as opposed to how most governments look at issues, which is how do we solve this? And then how does that solution stay in place?
Actually, I had a few more questions for you, but since we're running out of time, Mehmet, I want to get back to you. Tell me about the Gaza situation, Mehmet, because over 52,000 people have now been killed by Israeli forces in the occupied Gaza Strip. We're seeing videos every day. Hospitals are being destroyed. There's no food. There's no humanitarian aid. What must Trump do right now? Because Trump is insistent on displacing the Palestinians and then creating a Riviera of the Middle East. Would that plan go forward? What steps are needed right now from the Trump administration in order to end the war or maybe even achieve a ceasefire?
Well, I think the most immediate action that is needed is a ceasefire, and then the access to, the access to be open for humanitarian aid to be delivered, and ultimately for that ceasefire to become a permanent end to the war or genocide taking place. And Omar, I mean, as simple as this is for me to say and easy for me to say it, the war could be done in one night. If Trump wanted, or the Western powers wanted to end the war, the genocide in Gaza, I mean, this is a war against babies, literally killing, airstrikes, killing babies in their sleeps. It is not a war against an established army. It is a war against civilians. It's a war against the Palestinian people as a whole. Today it's Gaza, tomorrow it's West Bank, next it's somewhere else, until the occupied territories are left with no Palestinians. I think the ultimate aim is to carry out this destruction. It has been going on for 7 years, okay? But where will it end? What will Trump do? Mr. Kavalich said, everything that is being planned in Syria will have to put in account the Israel's security, basically, right? So I think the U.S. foreign policy, when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to the Middle East, as a wider region, it's been held hostage by Tel Aviv. So the Netanyahu government, Netanyahu's cabinet, and Trump's cabinet are not much different when it comes to looking at Gaza, when it comes to looking at Israel-Palestine conflict. So when they are seeing everything from the same perspective, if we are thinking that the Netanyahu government or the war cabinet will end the war on Gaza, then we should expect the same from the United States. But I don't think that, even with the Biden administration, although there was a softer rhetoric when it comes to the issue, they were at least mentioning some keywords as humanitarian access or a ceasefire, etc. Trump administration does not see this even. It doesn't even look at the world from the same perspective when it comes to killing babies. So I think, what can be done? They can end the war in one night. They can end the war in 24 hours. Will they do that? If Netanyahu government wants to do that, they will do that. If the Netanyahu government or the Israeli state or the Israel's ultimate aims for Palestine allow that, then they will do that. Otherwise, I don't think this is going to be an issue that the United States will decide as a sovereign state acting on its own without Israel's pressure or Israeli lobbies' pressure or the other European countries that see a Palestine issue from the same perspective. The matter is not the 52,000 people. The ultimate aim is not just Gaza. The ultimate goal or the conflict is not a conflict that started on October 7th. So I think if we look at the issue or the genocide in Gaza as if this was an event that started on October 7th and what is the world going to do about this, then I think we're missing a lot of points. We're not seeing the bigger picture about what Israel's ultimate aim is, what Zionist regime's ultimate aim is, and this is not, this is not about Semitic, or this is not about a religion doing these things. I think this is this is something beyond that, trying to occupy more territory, trying to expand the war to Lebanon, to occupy Syria? What is the ultimate aim here? If it is Israeli security, I think acknowledging that Palestinian people exist on their own land will be the first step for Israeli security. If Israel wants to be secure in the region, it needs to respect the lives of civilians so that that ideology that actually they see as a threat can find no excuse to see Israel as a threat.
John, what's your take on that?
One of the challenges I think that that everyone that has an interest in Gaza has to deal with is who are the actors that can make a difference and what are they doing? And this brings Turkey into the mix. There has been no head of state that has been more consistently vocal about what is happening in Gaza and the fact that it shouldn't happen than President Erdoğan. And during the UN last year, I was with him and I asked him a question. And he said that you are, in the Muslim community, the guy. No one has a louder voice. But you're basically the only voice. The other voices haven't done a lot. They've flapped their gums, but haven't done anything that may negatively affect them in support of the Palestinians. But my bigger question was, Israel has about $230 billion in foreign reserves. The Gaza destruction has been estimated at $20 to $30 billion. And I asked President Erdoğan, who should pay and who will pay? Now, I expected that he would say, well, Israel should pay. They destroyed the place. We didn't destroy it. They destroyed it. So you break it, you pay for it. And he said, no. He said, they won't pay a penny. Other governments will. And he looked at me and he said, your government, for example. And I think that is one of the true challenges of what's happening in Gaza, and to try to stop what's happening in Gaza, is that thus far the Muslim-led community, the Arab states particularly, what have they done to put pressure on the state of Israel? To the extent where they may upset the US administration, they may upset the European Union, they may tip oil prices, but what have they done to say enough, and we're going to show you what we mean by enough unless you do this and this and this? And that's where, President Erdoğan, the challenge, where he has the microphone, he has the voice, he has the rational reasoning, but where are the collective other heads of state and heads of government that are actually going to do something? And I think until we see that, it's sort of an elasticity theory that goes to the Russia-Ukraine war, that in the Russia-Ukraine war, the elasticity theory is about that President Putin is willing to do to Ukraine what Ukraine is not willing to do to Russia, meaning that the Russian Federation blow up schools and hospitals and apartment buildings and where civilians are. So the Russian Federation will do that to achieve its goals. President Zelensky cannot do that because the country supporting him will not allow it, and his own domestic political constituent won't allow it. So therefore, you have an imbalance. And with Gaza, you have sort of that same one. The state of Israel is willing to do whatever it feels it needs to do, and that continues to change. But those that are saying don't do this aren't willing to do enough to make them stop.
Mehmet, I believe you would.
I think I agree to a certain extent with what you're saying, but I mean, just to bring a different perspective, I think the Gaza issue is no longer I don't think we should confine or restrict this to an issue of the Muslim world or an issue that the Muslim world needs to respond to. The Gaza issue is a humanitarian. I mean, it's a issue of humanity as a whole. It's an issue of the international community. Arab states or Turkey didn't create the Gaza issue. Those who created the issue from day one should be responsible for finding a solution to this.
But what if they're not interested in doing so?
Who will put pressure on the United States if it is not Russia, China, India, and even states like Turkey, where they have a very limited power to do? I mean, a middle power country like Turkey has no leverage over the United States, and this is a simple fact, right? When this is the case, and Turkey is one of the more powerful states in the region, expecting the other countries in the region who have no agency, political agency in the international arena, strong enough to put pressure on the United States, expecting them to take action is, I think, looking at a, for the lack of a better word again, futile effort. Because
even a little
that's
bit.
why I said I agree, because that voice,
that
silence is killing all of us. And I think that silence should be recorded in history by all actors, international actors, that are remaining silent or remaining idle in face of this humanitarian crisis that will be recorded in the history. But remaining silent and remaining idle is one thing, but actually supporting that action is another thing. And I think the international community and the people as a whole should put pressure on those who support Israeli actions. I mean, look at U.S. public. There's protests and there is student movements, but is this something that is happening nationwide? Is everyone approaching Gaza issue similarly? Some research is showing that there is now actually an opposition to U.S. policy on Israel, especially after October 7, but it's not something that is very strong. So at home, we're not so much interested. In European capitals, we see protests, we see student movements, and we see boycotts, etc. But is it a widespread action? Does it turn into policy change? And that is not going to be any meaningful if it doesn't translate into. I mean, Mr. Erdoğan and Turkey are doing what they can,
and they should, and it's incredibly.
And Turkey is not doing this.
It's good that he's doing.
And Turkey is not doing this because Gaza is a Muslim population. Turkey's position on Ukraine is the same. Turkey does not accept the occupation in Ukraine. Turkey's approach to these conflict is not based on religions. It's based on just simply being human. And if there is an injustice, that's why Mr. Erdoğan always says, a fair world is possible. The world is bigger than five, because this system allows these crises to happen, and the system fails to find solutions to the problem that it creates. And I think, he was talking about migration yesterday. When we look at the migration, most of the problems related to migration are due to wrong policies of the Western countries in Northern Africa, or Africa as a continent, in the Middle East, or elsewhere in the global South. The cause of the problem is the West, and when there is a problem, they don't even want to share the burden, or they don't want to manage the solutions. So I think, when the powerful becomes the just, what happens in Gaza takes a very long time to be solved.
And unfortunately, that 52,000 figure continues to go up.
And that's only maybe the official. There's those who under the rubble still need to be rescued.
Potentially thousands.
Yeah, we'll probably have to double the figure if we take into account that as well. John, my final question is for you. We're in the final minute. Just very briefly, there are so many problems at home. There are so many problems abroad. Rising prices, illegal migration, multiple different things that Trump is facing right now. How do you expect his, let's say, the end of the first year of his presidency? Do you think that there could be some credible advances?
As a citizen, as a taxpayer, I hope so. And I hope that he's able to make some of what he's wanting to do work in a fair, in a balanced, in an effective way. and a just way and a legal way. His first 100 days today, it seems like the first 1,000 days, but it's also, 6% of his term. He's got 1,460 days, so he's got 1,360 days left. That's a lot of time. I think by the end of the year, we'll have seen a good amount of his economic plan in place. What we won't see, though, is a tremendous amount of the consequences to that, because there is a lag time to all of this. When the legislation is passed, it's signed into law, and then whether it's tax issues, whether it's the increase in the debt, whether it's migration and immigration policies, we're still seeing, and the courts are involved with this, so we're still seeing this play out. But what I think we can all be confident in is that some polling that's come out the last 24 hours that showed he has the lowest numbers of the last 5 or 6 presidents. But I think some of the punditry is forgetting two important things. First of all, when it's negative...
John, I'm afraid we're running out of time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on the program. Mehmet Çelik, thank you so much as well. That brings us to the end of today's episode. We'll continue to follow how global developments, especially U.S. foreign policy, shape Turkey's role in the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged with Turkey's diplomacy.